Check 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
1,
6.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Take it all. All right. Now, first, you tell me what to do. So we're just gonna. You're gonna get you right here. You can sit down now. Okay. Thank you.
Oh, is that right?
Put it on here. But it'll
Thank you.
Cut the
Very
rest of
much.
it off. Looks ghetto. All right. Dan's
Is that okay?
Yeah, you're good. Flip this around.
Ah.
I think he was right there. I just saw him walk across the street right there. Dan?
I don't mind. You tell me. Just hang it down. Okay. All right. Nice. Okay. 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 And this is this being amplified or just broadcast? Okay. So, but I still need to talk loud. Okay. Is this too loud like this or okay? All right. Oh, very good. Thank you for telling me that. Thank you. Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Do you need a coffee or something?
Man, I think I'm good. I might just put a little more hot water in here.
You sure?
Yeah. Do you mind just a little bit more hot water? Thanks, man. Thank you very much.
Right there.
Do I have to drink coffee? Am I going to mess up
You
the
don't have
theme
to.
if I don't? Okay, all
You don't
right.
have to.
I'll be drinking. I'll drink water then. Thank you.
Should probably put that in. You should probably put that in a mug. Perfect. That makes you look like you're
Very good. Thank you, brother. Thank you. I'll drink it down a little bit. It'll be good.
There you are, good. He's gonna face him.
Yeah, so you just want to put the microphone on this side.
Yeah. I can put it on this. Yeah.
Hello, how are you doing? Good, thank you.
Dan?
After I get
right
unplugged, I'll come over and bug you. I don't want. Hi, how are you doing? Hi, Hughes. How you doing? Good to meet you. Thank you for having us. This is neat.
Okay.
Hi. How y'all doing?
Is that his energy drink?
Yes, ma'am. I'm the other guy. I think I've got enough cord here. I'm Brian Hughes.
Does he want that label out? Are y'all getting?
What's your last name? Pleasure to meet you, Miss Riley.
Huh?
Brian Hughes. How are you?
Did you want me to put that there? Yeah. I don't think we'll
Brian Hughes. Good to meet you. How's Callie
I just
spelled?
didn't know if you wanted it. In
That's your first name spelled.
That's all. Fine.
Just like it sounds. All right. Thank you. I'm just a politician from East Texas. I'm in the Texas Senate. You're not supposed to know me. That's all right. No, but I mean, it's great if you do, but it's probably bad if you. I represent about 1 million people in Northeast Texas, Title, Longview, Marshall, Texarkana, in the Texas Senate. All right. All right. Do you live around here now?
How's it going, man? Matt, Brian Duvall.
Outstanding.
How are you?
This is a neat part of the world. I get down here pretty frequently.
Of course.
My home is up in East Texas, north of here.
We should have just pulled
Good
up
to
our
meet you.
production truck.
It is, yes, ma'am. It's pretty country up there, yes, ma'am.
We called
I'm one of the dumber people there. Most of them are much smarter than me, but we are country people. There's definitely that. I agree. Thank you.
No, that's me.
Matt is a bang man. We got 3 or 4 flavors in the office. Matt keeps us in those things. Man.
All right, welcome back, everybody. We're gonna let people come into the Zoom meeting right now, so it's populating. This is our first, I guess, mixed coffee with Crenshaw. And we got mixed meeting in person, also on Zoom. And Senator Brian Hughes, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
So this is gonna be a great conversation about election integrity and what's really going on with everything with the Texas election reforms and what on earth the Democrats are doing in Washington, D.C. as they plan their escape with their hardship. And I think we should all maybe have a moment of silence and prayer for them as they go through their hardships. And I'm not sure that they've even received the care packages that they've requested. Do you know if they have?
I think they did spur an increase in care packages sent to U.S. military overseas. So that's been good. That's been good.
Yeah, I mean, the Democrats are basically in Afghanistan right now. There's really not that much difference between them and, you know, our soldiers fighting on the front lines. It is kind of been fascinating to watch them and their self-aggrandizement, and you know, this sort of heroic, this heroic sense that they're contributing to the defense of democracy. And we're going to debunk a lot of that because it's important that people know what they're even against. And we're going to try to honestly assess what their talking points have been, why they're against these reform bills, which, you know, frankly, I look at them and I would describe them as kind of boring. I mean, right? They're a little bit boring.
For all the hype, you would think these were just crazy items. And in fact, you read them and they're simple, common sense reforms that virtually everyone ought to be in favor of. It's disappointing after the way they hype it up. You're right.
So I want to give you all a little background on the Senator Brian Hughes, now serving your second term in the Texas Senate, representing the 16 counties of Senate District 1 in Northeast Texas. Before being elected to the Senate in 2016, represented District 5 in the Texas House of Representatives for 14 years. And you're a great person to have on this. You're an author of one of the bills, but also a legal background. You earned your law degree from Baylor University and obtained a prestigious clerkship from U.S. District Judge William Steger. So well versed on this, and you guys have already passed these things in the Senate.
We have.
So as far as I understand it. And all right, so let's get into let's actually start from the beginning. Why is it even important to be talking about this? Why is it important to devote the time and energy into the legislation of election reform in Texas?
Their right to vote is so precious, so fundamental. And I don't have to tell you about the cost of it and people like you who put on the uniform and suffered for it. And so it's a precious blood-bought right. It's too important not for us to secure. And in Texas today, we have ballot harvesters, paid political operatives who are stealing votes, who are coercing voters, misleading voters, claiming to a system, and in fact, misleading them, overcoming their will. We also have folks voting illegally. And of course, that cancels out a legitimate vote. So it's too important for us not to secure. There's a pending case in my district up in East Texas. I've got a county commissioner out on bail for mail ballot fraud. Anybody who tells you there's no voter fraud in Texas is telling you a very big lie.
Yeah, and the thing about that, and Texas does have some of the better election systems when you compare it to other states too. I mean, there's ways to cheat in Texas, but it's not that easy. But even then, we still have plenty of cases where there's actually, and people are indicted for it and charged with it. I mean, this isn't just made up.
Congressman, you're right. Pending cases in East Texas and the Oregon Valley, in suburban Texas. Currently, the AG is prosecuting 43 defendants with over 500 individual counts of voter fraud. And again, most of these cases are not individual voters trying to cheat. It's vote harvesters. It's folks trying to mislead them, trying to steal their votes. This is about protecting the right to vote. And interestingly enough, with all the debate about this, the victims in these cases most often are the elderly, the folks who don't speak English so well, first-time voters. Most of the victims in these cases are people of color, and they're the ones who raise the complaints. That's what we're trying to respond to.
Right. There's people showing up, they're claiming, they're filling things out. You don't know how to trust who they're, you know, right. You got to take the uncertainty out of it. And I think that's our best argument when we talk about election integrity. Yes, every vote needs to count, and even a few votes, because what's the talking point that they always retort with? It's always, well, there's a minimum amount of voter fraud. Well, you can't have a minimum amount of voter fraud.
They used to say there's no evidence of voter fraud. And then when we showed them evidence, they said, there's no evidence of widespread voter fraud.
Right.
Our question has been, how much fraud is okay?
Right.
It's not acceptable.
I won my first election. I didn't win it. I got second place by 155 votes. So is that too much? When we have a member of Congress that won by 6 votes, is that the minimum threshold? I mean, there really can't be one, because we're a very evenly split country on the left and the right, and you have to know who won. And I think our best argument is like, look, because the Democrats will always say, why don't you want it to be easier to vote? I'm like, well, I don't want it to be easier to cheat. And it can only be so easy. In the end, voting is a competition. It's a game. It's a game that we play against each other. Okay, and it's a competition. So you have to have rules of a game. I mean, why don't we make the end zones bigger on a football field? It'd be easier to throw a touchdown to somebody if the end zone was just bigger. Well, okay, well, how much bigger? And like, how much easier do you make it? Eventually, you have to put some kind of limit on it. And it's so strange to me that they don't understand this. Like, it's a standardized competition. You have to have limits to the game at some point, reasonable limits. And we're very well within those reasonable limits. But I think Democrats sometimes they're like, well, it should be as easy as like yelling out your drive-through order, you know, and is this who I'm voting for? And don't ask me who I am. I mean, like, how easy do you think it should really be? It's a little bit ridiculous. Okay. So
You're absolutely right. And you mentioned before how Texas compares to other states. We are in much better shape. I've met with state legislators from various states, and we're way ahead. You're right. We're in good shape in Texas, but there's still problems. And as you say, easy to vote, hard to cheat. Both are important. Like with drive-through voting, which I know we're going to talk about, which they experimented with in Harris County. You saw what the elections chief said after early voting, before election day started. The elections chief in Harris County said, we're going to stop this drive-through voting because we're concerned the votes may not count. So easy to vote is great until your votes don't count. So you're so right. It doesn't make any sense.
or you can't audit them. I mean,
That's right.
like there's other considerations here. There's a logistical nightmare in drive-through voting that takes all that extra election officials, extra logistical infrastructure. Same with 24-hour voting. Like, how much more manpower is actually needed for that? And is it really worth it? Does everybody really need to be voting at 2:30 a.m.?
Exactly.
It's just it's such a strange argument, and it makes us question their intentions. All right, this next question's for me. What are the major changes being contemplated at a federal level? This is an important question because all the Texas Democrats in Washington right now are saying they're there to fight for H.R. 1. They need the federal government to take over Texas elections. That's fundamentally what H.R. 1 does. And okay, why do we think it's unconstitutional? Why don't we like it? Well, there's a few things that people should know about H.R. 1. First of all, it's really good for my campaign. Okay, and if it's good for my campaign, that should raise a red flag for you. This bill actually matches small dollar donations to my campaign and all federal campaigns at a 6-to-1 rate. So if I get like a $200 donation, I then get $1,200 from the federal government, which is you. That's all. You're the federal government, by the way. That's your taxpayer money. So if you like that, most people don't though. Democrats or Republicans generally don't like that when they hear it. But that's what that does. I mean, under the guise that it takes money, it somehow is getting like corporate money and corrupt money out of elections. But it's just, again, for somebody like a campaign like mine, that would be enormously beneficial. So it is extremely beneficial for incumbents, especially. People should know that. It doesn't take any corruption out of the elections. It just keeps incumbents in power. Also overrules election practices that have been tailored for thousands of localities across the country, including requiring same-day registration without any integrity measures. So again, the logistical nightmare of trying to do that in states that aren't used to it. It also undermines voter ID at the polls and prohibits it in absentee voting. Mandates that states allow ballot harvesting, and permanently locks in nationwide no excuse mail-in ballot voting while lengthening post-election uncertainty. I want to translate that last point. That's a big one. So no excuse mail-in ballots means the county will just take its list of registered voters and send everybody a ballot. And in states that do this, we don't do this. Democrats tried to do this in Harris County in the last election. The bills in the Texas House prohibit that practice. The reason we should prohibit it, the reason everybody should just get a ballot. Well, maybe I'll let you answer that. I think you've got the same answer I do, but
We know the safest, most secure way to vote is in a polling place. There are protections in place. There's certainty. There's poll watchers there. Everything we need is there. We make it easy to do that, of course. Mail ballots are the greatest potential for fraud. It's interesting. 10 years ago, when we were debating in-person voter ID in Texas, our Democratic friends who didn't want voter ID said at that time, there's no problem with in-person voter fraud. The real problem is those mail ballots. There's all kinds of fraud over there, and they're on record. Of Democratic elected officials, Democratic federal judges, they all said, oh, there's all kinds of fraud with those mail ballots. Even the experts the Democrats paid to testify against voter ID said, oh, there's a lot of fraud with those mail ballots. We see how that works. My goodness, it's so easy to cheat, have your ballot stolen, to have someone mislead you and how to do the paperwork, to do the paperwork for you against your will. So those mail ballots are the most opportunities for fraud. That's been proven. Even the Brennan Center, which now regrets saying it because they're against all kinds of security, but they used to say mail ballots are the least secure method of voting.
That's an interesting point. Back when they were fighting against voter ID,
right.
And they've recently reversed course on that because 80% of Americans are in favor of voter ID.
That's right.
And the other thing is it reduces confidence in the elections to such an enormous extent because time and time again in states that do this, naturally your voter registration is not going to be perfect. It's impossible. It's an impossibility. You cannot make that perfect because people move. They don't necessarily report their change of address. I mean, there's a lot of factors. And so you're going to get ballots that aren't yours to your house. And once you see a ballot come to your house that you could fill out, it's got somebody else's name on it, you could send it in. And that, the only thing you can conclude at that point is that, well, somebody else might be doing this and somebody might be cheating, even if it's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 10. I mean, it reduces that confidence. Okay, next question. All right, let's get to the meat of the bill here about the changes in the bill that will help voters and improve election integrity. So I'll let you just take that wherever you want.
You bet.
We'll go through a bunch of lists here.
No, thank you. So we talk about easy to vote, hard to cheat. Easy to vote. Under current law in Texas, on election day, if you're in line when the polls close, you must be allowed to vote. That protection does not apply to early voting, and that's when most of us vote. So Senate Bill 1 extends that same protection to early voting for the first time ever in Texas. Also, under current law in Texas, if your work schedule does not allow you to get off work to vote, your employer must let you off to vote, but it's only on election day.
Okay.
Most of us vote early. Senate Bill 1 for the first time extends that protection to early voting as well.
Yeah, but that's somehow must be suppressing people. I can't
figure out what's sinister about it, but for some reason, as you said before, when we get complaints about the bill, they're generalizations. When we talk about the details of the bill, for some reason, it never ends up in the story on TV or in the paper or from our Democratic friends.
We've expanded early voting.
We've expanded early voting all across the state. And how about this? Many mail ballots are thrown out because of technicalities. You just mentioned that earlier. For the first time ever in Senate Bill 1, Texans will have a process to cure those ballots. You're an eligible voter. There's a problem with your ballot. You'll have a chance to fix that so your vote gets counted. So many ways making it easier to vote.
That's an important point. I want to harp on that one for a second. A stat that people need to know. In 2020, in the Democrat presidential primaries, about 500,000 ballots, mail-in ballots, are thrown out. So why is a mail-in ballot thrown out? This is why mail-in ballots are such a bad idea generally and need to be minimized to people who absolutely only can vote that way.
That's right.
And so 500,000 thrown out. So there's only 2 reasons a mail-in ballot might get thrown out. 1, they were trying to commit fraud and the election official caught it and threw it out. Or 2, they just screwed up their signature. It's a real person trying to vote and the election official threw it out because they screwed up their signature. It's a terrible process. So in either case, it's either total fraud or real ballots being thrown out, people trying to vote and they get their ballots thrown out. Neither of these options is good. So go vote in person. Is really the conclusion there. And also you need a curing process. Okay, so this bill allows Texans to do that. That's good.
We never had that before in Texas. It makes sense. And we talked about drive-through voting, 24-hour voting. Again, the ideal way to vote, which we want to make easier, as easy as we can, is in-person voting. What about folks who are disabled, who can't make it into the polling place? Well, of course, we have curbside voting for those folks in Texas. That's not going to change. That's always going to be there. But for able-bodied voters, we are asking them to park their car and go in and vote in the polling place. That's not too much to ask. Again, drive-through voting was such a disaster when it was experimented with, happened to be here in Harris County. And then 24-hour voting. We can't find anyone else in the country who has suggested, much less tried, 24-hour voting. It was tried here, and the testimony we heard from here and from other counties was, other counties said we didn't try because we couldn't find election workers, couldn't find poll watchers. And again, we're extending early voting hours, extending weekend early voting hours, and requiring your employer to let you off work to go vote. Not getting to vote at 2:30 in the morning is a pretty good trade-off for all those extra protections we're giving people to make it easier to vote.
Yeah, it just it just seems to be like the spin on the other side is let's imagine some random thing I want to do with respect to voting. I want to drive through at 4 a.m. Why can't
Exactly.
why are you trying to suppress me? This is when I want to vote.
You're so
4
right.
a.m. on a
You're
Monday
so
night.
right. You're
Like,
right.
Yeah.
And on that point, one of the real problems with drive-through voting, you mentioned it before. Think about that secret ballot. You may bring a family member with you to go to vote, but when you go in that polling booth, you go by yourself because that's a sacred right, that precious secret ballot. That's between you and the Lord. Your spouse, your coworker, your boss, your union official, nobody knows how you voted. But of course, with drive-through voting, people jammed into a car, passing the machine around. There's no secret ballot. It's just a terrible idea.
Yeah, it's a logistical nightmare. You can just imagine all the issues going on with that. All right, well, what else is in? I know it also makes before in Texas, counties had different early voting times as well. So this just makes it consistent.
That's exactly right. Current Texas law, only our larger counties are required to have 12 hours of early voting in that second week. We're expanding that to 55 more counties. So more counties will require more hours of early voting. Already in Texas, we have more early voting hours than New York, than New Jersey. The state of Delaware, the president's home state, has no early voting. They did just pass a bill to add it, but they still won't have as many days as Texas has. And we also crack down on those ballot harvesters. And you're familiar with this. If you talk to the Attorney General's office, the primary concerns they see, the cases they investigate, number one is ballot harvesting, stealing those mail ballots, and then illegal assistance, someone claiming to help the voter, but in fact, they're coercing them, misleading them, overcoming their will. I'll read you some sworn testimony from a voter in the Rio Grande Valley about what happened to her. And then finally, illegal voting. So the bill addresses all those things to make sure those legitimate votes count. That's really what the bill is about.
Yeah, let's go over the, I mean, what are their best arguments? Let's try and steel man their arguments the best we can. It's hard. I mean, we've asked them when they did their Capitol Hill speeches. We had some people interview them and ask them, like, honestly, what's the most egregious thing in these bills? And they came up with these non-answers. I mean, it's actually a hilarious video that we put out.
I've seen some of it. So they talk a lot about poll watchers. That's about all they can find to complain about. And of course, so
that's their big one.
It is, and they're misstating what the bill says. So current law, as you know, poll watchers are the eyes and ears of the public, and they keep calling them partisan poll watchers. Well, poll watchers are there from the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, from every candidate.
That's exactly what they are. They're partisan poll watchers. That's
right.
just they're supposed to
exactly. Be. Both sides have it. Exactly. That's their job.
The entire point.
They watch us, we watch them, right?
Right.
That's exactly right. And so under current law, a poll watcher in Texas is allowed to observe any activity in the polling place other than the voter casting her ballot. And it's a crime for an election official to prevent the poll watcher from doing that. That's current law. But the law is kind of vague on how close the poll watchers get to be. It says they can be close enough to conveniently observe. What does that mean? You saw those cases where poll watchers were kept behind glass or way over in the corner, 100 feet away from where the action was.
Not in Texas.
Not in Texas,
okay,
thankfully.
But we want to prevent that from ever happening.
Exactly right. So this bill says the poll watchers are allowed to be close enough to observe and hear the activity. That's all it says. It doesn't. Right. They still can't obstruct. They're not allowed to.
How did the Democrats spin that? Like, what are they trying to say is happening there?
They're saying that we are giving poll watchers the right to roam through the polling place, intimidate voters, and really they say that poll watchers are there to intimidate voters. I wish you could have seen some of the sweet little blue-haired poll watchers that came to testify in front of our committee. I'm sure they're not all like that, but they were friendly people. They're volunteers. They're there to do a job. They didn't seem very intimidating to me.
Yeah, and what evidence do they have that poll watchers would all of a sudden turn into some rabid intimidation machine?
No evidence at all, but they complain about that. And then they say generally, well, you're making it harder to vote. When we ask them how, they say, well, 24-hour voting. That's right. You can't vote at 2:30 in the morning, but you can vote more during the day on the weekends. You have to get off work to vote. Honestly, when we get talking about details, they kind of change the subject and talk about other states or about history. They don't want to talk about this bill.
Yeah, that's true. They talk about the past most often. clarifies the ban on unmanned drop boxes also, because that's a big push. They think there should just be boxes kind of spread throughout the counties that you can just go drop a mail-in ballot off.
That's exactly
What's wrong with doing
That's
that?
exactly right. So in Texas, we've never had that. So that mail ballot, you drop it in the mail, or you, the voter, can deliver the mail, can deliver the ballot to the election office. That ballot is pretty important. It needs to be put in the hands of an election worker to know what's going to be counted. Our election code doesn't provide for drop boxes. Some counties did that in Texas without authorization. We're making it clear we don't want unmanned drop boxes with ballots. Who knows what's happening to those ballots? Is it getting stuffed? It's not good for anybody. That points up another issue we've had. In the election code in Texas, we have good laws, but we had a few rogue election officials just making up the rules. 24-hour voting, drive-through voting, drop boxes. Those are not in the election code, but they were not forbidden. So we had a couple of rogue election officials make up the rules for themselves.
Yeah, it's about a chain of custody issue. I mean, with a lot of these things, that's what people have to understand. Again, you're setting up a competition, and it's a really important competition. Yes. It's a competition that people care about quite a bit. It's not like Texans versus Cowboys. I mean, people care about that too, like a lot, maybe more than they should. But but they really care about who wins an election. I mean, you know, and our country's been thrown through a lot of turmoil because people did not feel confidence in it. And it's easy to not feel confidence in an election when you can see all of these issues. You know, it doesn't mean you can prove it, right? And that's always the counter argument. Well, we'll prove that there was something wrong at that moment. Well, you can't. And that's actually the point. Because if you can't audit something, if you can't just look back and say, look, this was actually done correctly, then it drives this enormous distrust in the elections. And Texas is just getting ahead of that. Again, I don't think we've had enormous problems in Texas, but we do need to get ahead of it. That's what you guys do.
Congressman, you're exactly right. And I should have mentioned another bill that we passed separately in the regular session. For the first time, we'll have a paper backup for electronic voting. So many people are for that. It's been a long fight to get it in Texas. And also under Senate bill, it makes sense. Did you say so we can do an audit, so we can do a recount? There's really no satisfaction when you cast your electronic ballot and it just disappears into the ether.
It does drive me a little crazy. You know, like, I agree. I mean,
and also importantly, we'll have live stream video feed from central counting whenever those ballots are there, 24 hours. So once the ballots are brought in, when they're counted, as long as they're sitting there, live stream video feed for anyone to look at. And again, you notice all these provisions protect everyone, left, right, rural, urban, they're there for everyone.
That makes a lot of sense. You know, America actually set up very secure and simple elections in 2005 in Iraq. And you know how we did it is that Iraqis have an ID, and we made them show up in person, and we gave them an ink stain on their hand to show that they voted. So you know who voted, they have an ID, and you show up in person. Now, didn't solve Iraq's problems, but it wasn't because they didn't trust the outcome of the election. It was because, well, they hate each other, and you know, there's sectarian violence and all of that. But it starts with an election, right? It starts with just some kind of confidence that your vote counts. Not just that it counts, but that it's not canceled out by somebody who did it, who committed fraud. And it's what's worth noting too. Obviously, there's an incentive for fraud. You know, there's this strange belief on the other side's arguments that everybody would just be angels, that there's no reason to think that there'd be widespread fraud. Well, of course there's reason. We're talking about power here. We're talking about who gets power. And if there's opportunity for it, and also not that much risk in doing so, you will get somebody who commits fraud. It might not be this sort of systemic conspiracy like too many on our side have probably tried to portray, but it certainly is organic. And what I see Democrats try to do, again, it's not these like widespread conspiracies, but what it is create the environment that makes it susceptible to voter fraud, makes it susceptible to those individuals who are like, I'll take the risk. You know, or to those groups, it's mostly activist groups. They're like, I'll take the risk, or I'll go get my people out there and fill in all those people's ballots. You know, yeah, no, they can't even, you know, they don't even know who's voting that day, but hey, let's get them to fill something out. Is that the right thing to do? No, I don't think it is.
Congressman, you're exactly right. And as you say, there's not much of a downside to it. And men are not angels, we're sinners. And so we're prone to those things. Let me share this with you. This is from testimony from a trial in Hidalgo County. This is a voter named Cavazos, and I'm going to read you her testimony if you don't mind, because it talks about what you just said. And Ms. Cavazos was voting for the first time, not familiar with the machines. And so she was told by a campaign worker, talk to Marcella, she'll help you out. So Marcella is there waiting at the polling place. Ms. Cavazos comes up and Marcella tells the election workers, I'm here to help her. So if you're helping a voter, you get to go in and you get to go in the polling place with them in this place. And so the voter says this, and I go to the polling place and Marcella goes up. I go to the polls and Marcella comes up behind me. I had the intention of, well, she was going to assist me how to do those things because I didn't understand that machine. So she started punching in the machine. I don't even remember the language in the poll. She was telling me, you're going to press here, you're going to press over there. So I saw that she put it in favor of the team that she was on. And then the voter concludes. So then I had the idea that she was giving me like a tour of how to do those things and that she was going to leave. So by the time I told her, okay, let me vote on my own, she said, no, you already voted. Voters like that are the ones we're trying to protect. And paid political workers like that, as you say, there's an incentive to do it, and there's really no downside because it's hard to catch them.
Yeah. And that's heartbreaking. And unfortunately happens a lot.
It does.
I mean, again, because there's an incentive to do it. Men are not angels. This is kind of a key tenet of the philosophy of our founding.
Indeed.
Men are not angels, but we strive towards a higher good, and we create a system of incentives and structures by which we have the most optimal outcomes. I mean, that's all this is. It's not rocket science. What do you think about the charges of voter suppression? How have, a lot of these bills that are being passed, it's not like they haven't been tried before. Have they really affected voter turnout?
I'm glad you asked that because we heard these same charges back about 10 years ago with voter ID. And we were told this is racist, it's voter suppression, you're going to suppress the vote. But what happened after voter ID was put in place? Turnout went up across the state, every sector, every demographic, because people had confidence their vote was going to count. It's so frustrating. We hear these charges and these fundraising emails go out from Washington and the national media backs them up. And they scare voters, and voters are told, we're making it harder for you to vote. Now, when voters look at what's in the bill, they're kind of disappointed. Like you said, that's it. That's all you got.
It's kind of boring.
It's boring. It is. It's simple common sense reforms that help every voter, no matter how they vote, no matter where they vote. And it's terribly frustrating because they can't point us to anything in this bill that suppresses the vote.
I gotta hide my energy drink because it's a coffee with Crenshaw. I'm not drinking coffee today. Sorry. And I go through this whole spiel about how I make coffee, but I actually, after my surgery, for some reason, coffee, I can't, it tastes really bad to me now.
Oh, man.
It's actually heartbreaking. Yeah, because I
man.
love coffee, but I can't drink it anymore. I'm done with coffee. So we're gonna have to rename it, rename these things. Yeah, I got some statistics here actually. So voter participation soared 66% increase in 2020. And look, I mean, what I tweeted this out at the beginning of this controversy. No, voters will not notice any of these bills. You won't notice anything because most voters just vote normally.
That's right.
The only people who will notice this stuff are the people who try to fill out other people's ballots.
That's exactly
Because we'll make it a little bit harder for them to do that. Make them sign something that says they're good, make a sworn affidavit, something like a sworn statement, I think.
So already, if you assist a voter at the polling place, you have to write your name. Now we're going to get your name and address, and we're going to get you to promise that you didn't compel this voter to let you help them and that you didn't try to overcome their vote. It's pretty common sense stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And it also doesn't prevent that aid from happening.
No, of course not. Of course not. We worked with the disability community because in the initial drafts of the bill, they had some concerns. So we changed the language to take care of those rough edges. We want to make it easy for everyone to vote and hard to cheat. And they're not mutually exclusive. We can do both.
And that's it should be about like a physical disability, right? I mean, that's really what we're trying to overcome.
Right.
Because you can imagine those kind of scenarios.
That's right. That's the line.
But it's not just for somebody who like wants some help or like doesn't know who's on the ballot. And I think Democrats often say like they'll want to be like, well, I mean, they don't really know what's going on. Well, if they don't know what's going on, why are they voting?
That's exactly right.
I'm just going to say it.
And the law in Texas is clear on that. If you're disabled and can't come into the polling place, we'll bring the voting machine to you for curbside voting. That's still a secret ballot. For you to have assistance inside the polling place, Texas law says that means that you can't read the ballot or you can't see. because
Right.
we have equipment out to
Or
help
can't
folks with
work it or
disabilities.
something.
Exactly.
Like there's
Those are the
yeah,
only reasons. That's right.
that makes sense. All right. We kind of went over this. It's a question: Does voting fraud happen with any regularity? You already mentioned this, but I've got some exact stats here. Texas AG's office has convicted 140 people for election fraud since 2005. There's 43 open election fraud cases pending. More than half of the convictions involved mail-in ballot fraud.
That's right.
And like we said, like nothing is acceptable. It's also worth noting there was a bipartisan, because the post Florida debacle in what 2000. So Florida redid its whole election reform, and there was in the 2005 there was like a federal election council, something like that. It was a bipartisan event. Jimmy Carter was the Democrat in charge of it, and they were very explicit in that report that there's a lot of fraud in mail-in ballots.
Mail ballots. That's right.
For obvious reasons. This is intuitive.
That's right.
Like we don't need to do a scientific study on this. It's obvious why there might be fraud with that because of the lack of chain of custody. A couple other examples here. 2017 investigation of Dallas City Council election found 700 fraudulent mail-in ballots signed by the same witness using a fake name. So yeah, so like that's one case, but that's 700 ballots.
Exactly.
It's important to note that it's not, because somebody might look at that number earlier, 140 people convicted for election fraud since 2005. It doesn't seem like that much, but a couple things. It's extremely hard to prove that. That's one of the big problems. It's extremely hard to prosecute it. Second of all, each one of those cases could be for lots and lots of ballots. Some recent cases: Medina County, 4 people, including an election justice of the peace, were charged with 150 counts of election fraud, including ballot harvesting. In Gregg County, a county commissioner and several others were charged with 134 felony accounts of voter fraud for encouraging ineligible individuals to vote. In Harris County, there are recent instances where campaign workers engaged in ballot harvesting in elderly care facilities. Again, that's a vulnerable population. It's easy for them to persuade them, so they target them.
Yes.
And like I said before, 500,000 mail-in ballots are rejected in the Democrat presidential primary in 2020. That's probably my favorite talking point on this, because it just really shows, again, there's only 2 options. Either election officials caught fraud,
That's right.
or they denied real ballots. In either case, it's not a good situation.
That's
So
right.
why don't we just not do that?
That's right.
It's, and it's not clear how to make that better. I mean, Texas has made it a little bit better by requiring that ID. Same with Georgia, because Georgia's gone through the same nonsense
right.
that Texas has.
That's right.
And hell, even the MLB pulled out of Atlanta.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
sure.
It went to a state which had less opportunities to vote than Georgia does. Yeah, that was really smooth.
Yeah, right.
And to your point about mail ballots, you're right. I should have mentioned in Senate Bill 1. Now, for the first time, we'll have voter ID for mail ballots. And so you'll write, when you send your application for ballot by mail, you'll write your driver license number, your state ID. If you don't have one of those, you'll write the last 4 of your social. If you don't have that, you'll sign an affidavit. That's exactly the requirements to register to vote. So every registered voter is going to be able to comply with that. So the ballot comes to you, you fill out the mail ballot, put it in that security envelope, and on the outside of the envelope, under the flap, you write the number, send it back, and those numbers match. And we know that it was you and not someone who stole a ballot out of your mailbox or who had it forwarded to the wrong address, as you were describing. How many times have you heard from voters who showed up to vote and they said, "Oh, you've already voted. You voted by mail." No, I didn't. It's for those situations. You're exactly right.
Okay, next question. You kind of answered all this, but we'll add whatever you think we haven't talked about already. But will any of the proposed changes for elections in the state of Texas disenfranchise any voters, especially along race lines? Because that's usually the accusation. Does it disenfranchise minority voters, and how?
As you know, the voter rolls are colorblind. When you register to vote, you don't say anything about your race, your national origin, and that's how it should be. And so this allegation that this bill would disenfranchise voters or make it harder for voters of color to vote, that's false and it's reckless. It is simply not true. In fact, let's talk about those ballot harvesters, those folks who are cheating, claiming to assist voters. You mentioned that case in Gregg County, Texas. Now, the defendant happens to be an African-American Democrat. You know who the complainant in the case was? An African-American Democrat. This case in the Rio Grande Valley, it was Hispanics who were complaining. So many times, the victims of mail ballot fraud, of illegal assistance, are people of color. And those people are crying out and we're trying to respond to them. But since their narrative doesn't match the DNC and CNN, we're supposed to ignore them. And so they accuse us of being against people of color when this bill protects voters of color more than anybody else.
Yeah, and Democrats would say, well, they need more help. My question is, why do they need more? Why are they so below your level that you need to help them fill out their ballot? Like that's something that I think Democrats should have to answer. It gets to this bigotry of low expectations argument. And like, why can't minorities get IDs? And if that really is a systemic problem, we should definitely get them IDs, because you need an ID to live in this society.
We do. And Congressman, in response to voter ID last time, that was a concern. We originally said a driver license to vote, and then they said some folks don't have one. You're right, state ID. Well, that costs $20. That's like a poll tax. You're right. So we provide a free state ID to vote. We're removing every possible obstacle. And you're right, suggesting that some voters need more help. You heard what the vice president said about rural voters. That should have offended a lot of us.
Yeah,
But
that's
voters,
for sure.
voters will get it right if we'll stop the ballot harvesters and the folks who are trying to cheat and trying to mislead the voters.
It's also important to just add some stats in here, because again, like you said earlier, what they tend to do is go back to historical discrimination, which of course did happen.
You bet. Sad.
But that doesn't tell us a story about what's happening now.
That's right.
And in the 2012 presidential election, blacks voted at a higher rate than whites nationally, 66% versus 64%. And that's been pretty consistent. Well, 2012 was a bit of an outlier, but the point is there's nothing hindering here.
That's right.
See if there's any. It's about the same too. So 70% of blacks are registered to vote, 72% of whites are registered. Texas is ranked 10th in black voter turnout. So there's just, the point is, there's just no evidence here of what kind of suppression practices might be taking place.
There's just we made so much progress. And as you say, 10th in the nation in turnout for African-American voters. I mean, come on. And a part of that was because in Texas, it's easy to vote. There's plenty of opportunities to early vote. We're making even more opportunities. Those claims are just false and reckless.
So, and they make people feel bad too. I mean, because look, there's a lot of people that are susceptible to these arguments, and it's a crappy thing to feel that way. Like, wow, there's an entire political party that wants to suppress my vote because they trust their politicians that they vote for.
Yeah.
They trust them. They shouldn't, but they do. And it's not a good thing. And what does that do? That's like a different way of creating uncertainty in our elections and removing confidence from our elections. When, people have to feel like they have to fight for the right to vote. You already have the right to vote. It's very easy. Like, don't let anybody tell you otherwise. This is complete nonsense.
That's right.
This question is about drive-through voting, but I think we hit that ad nauseum already. Kind of hit this one too. Does Texas allow enough days of early voting, and are voting hours fair? I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, thanks. You covered it well. We already have more than New York, more than New Jersey, more than Delaware. Delaware has none, but they're going to add some. They'll still have less than we have.
Because we had so many memes comparing Texas and Delaware.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So Delaware's like, oh no,
Exactly.
they caught us. Number 10 is about voter ID. We kind of hit all of these already. Why do we need voter ID at all? I think we've hit that one pretty well. Maybe I'll add a couple more details here. Supreme Court has found that voter ID requirements are perfectly constitutional and not overly burdensome. Keep in mind, all the Texas Democrats had to show some form of ID to get to escape to DC.
That's right.
On their E&E plan. It's escape and evasion in military jargon. And again, pray for our fellow politicians in DC. They really need your prayers. Over 81% of Texans support voter ID. That's about the same at the national level. This has wide support. Study from the National Bureau of Economic Research found voter ID has no negative impact on voting for any group based on race, sex, age, or socioeconomic status. And again, in most statistical cases, it's voter turnout goes up.
That's right.
After voter ID is
That's
passed, because people have IDs, as it turns out. This isn't And people who don't have IDs, they got a lot of problems, and they probably need other forms of help.
Yes.
And so it's just so insulting to an entire race of people to say that they can't get IDs just because of their skin color. There's just no reason to think that. It's a racist thing to think, to be honest.
It is.
So we've already went over this one too. We've already hit a lot of these because we were just kind of talking about it. But this one is, why do we have partisan poll watchers, and how do these volunteers help reduce fraud? Do you have anything to add to that? We kind of went over that pretty well.
Yeah, they're the eyes and ears of the public. It's important.
Why is ballot harvesting such an important issue to address? Again, I'm not sure we have anything to add to that. We've talked about it a lot.
I'll say on ballot harvesting, Congressman, I bet you and I have Democratic colleagues who will admit off the record that ballot harvesting is a problem. These ballot harvesters will come to the candidate and say, hey, you want my help? Here, I'll help you for this amount, or if you don't hire me, I'll go to your opponent.
Yeah.
Again,
Republican and Democrat.
Of course,
there was a
of
Republican
course,
a Republican winner that was, was it North Carolina?
in North Carolina, that's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
yeah, because of they were doing illegal ballot harvesting. So this isn't partisan. It's just a bad election practice.
That's exactly right.
I'll read some statistics so people understand some background as well. Because it is not as widespread in Texas, but in 27 states, a voter can designate someone to return their ballot. And in 13 states, the law is silent on whether a single person can return multiple ballots. 2018, the registrar in Orange County, California, reported that his county had people dropping off maybe 100 or 200 ballots. So when somebody's doing that, because at first it seems like, well, why can't I tell my sister to go drop off my ballot? That seems reasonable. But you got to put safeguards around that, because it's if you just say someone else can turn it in, it quickly turns into somebody going around collecting ballots. Maybe they filled them out. I mean, the activists can really take advantage of this.
They can. And this bill in Texas is one of the strongest ones we've seen, because you're right. It's one, relatives are of course allowed to help you with that. But here's what this bill in Texas will say on mail ballot harvesting. It says that a paid campaign worker cannot have an in-person interaction with a voter involving a mail ballot or application for ballot by mail. Telephone is great. Knocking doors for campaigning is great. Help people who are not paid by the campaign can help the ballot fill out their voter. But if you're paid by a campaign, you cannot have an in-person interaction with a voter involving a mail ballot. We're just going to remove all doubt about whether campaigns are messing with these people trying to fill out mail ballots and mail ballot applications.
Yeah,
it's going to make it clean.
Well, that's good, and that's a very minimal amount of safeguards.
That's
to be
right.
honest. That's right. Paid campaign. Does it say anything about volunteers?
This was just paid campaign.
Yeah. Here's another stat. Out of 33 million mail-in ballots that were cast in the 2016 presidential election, 400,000 of them didn't count. They were thrown out, disqualified for reasons ranging from invalid signatures to being too late. So again, it's just a bad practice, whether you're a Democrat or Republican. What are the changes proposed to drive-through and 24-hour? Okay, we already went through that. All right, guys, we pretty much got all your questions, so we're doing pretty well. How much time do we got left? Where are we at? Okay, all right, so we're about wrapping up anyway. Let's see here. This last question, how do we deal with the proliferation of propaganda and outside efforts to influence election outcomes through fake news? To me, this seems like the biggest threat against election integrity. There's a good argument to be made there. When people say the election was stolen, the best argument for that would be by a corrupt media that sort of lied and painted to you, as opposed to a kraken. But look, it is a problem. I'm not sure it's ever not going to be a problem in a democracy where you allow free speech. So, I think too many on our side want us to do something about that. And I'm like, I don't know what I can do about people lying to you. You've got to help yourself through that. And you've got to figure out the right arguments and convince your neighbors of it. It's messy, but that is the essence of a democracy and a free society. We purposefully try not to choose what the truth is and how to impose that on people. But you can fight it through better free speech. That's why we do events like this, put the information
Yes.
out.
Answer to bad speech is more speech, not enforced silence. Of course, you're exactly right. The Supreme Court got that one right. And it is hard. It's messy. Free speech is tough. I don't have to tell you that, but it's worth it because the good news is we have an exchange of ideas and we're going to get to the truth.
Yeah.
Of course, when we have a handful of oligarchs in San Francisco that are controlling free speech, that's another discussion. But with free speech, we have nothing to fear from free speech. I'm with you.
Yeah, I agree. And it's not a satisfying answer to a lot of people who want you to crack down somehow, but you really can't. I mean, the best we can do, I think, is crack down against censorship. Florida's experimenting with that kind of stuff right now. It's
Yes.
obvious, it of course got bogged
Right.
down in the courts because it's actually a pretty complicated issue.
It is.
It's not black and white. We're looking at legislation at the federal
Good,
level
good.
for Section 230 and things like that.
We
protect
passed-
censorship.
We passed Senate Bill 5 in Texas, which we believe addresses Section 230 and gives Texans a way to get back online. We recognize they have to moderate content,
Yeah.
pornography, excessive violence, but viewpoint discrimination, that's the problem. And right now they can get away with it. The Florida bill was good. Senate Bill 5, we believe, is better. I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but I'd love you to take a look at it. It takes a fresh approach. It acknowledges Section 230 and allows Texans to get back online. It holds them accountable for censorship. We've got some law professors helping with it, and several states are looking at this bill as a model of how to hold them accountable. And so we're not giving up on that.
And I think that's what consumers are concerned about. They just want to be treated fairly.
That's right.
I think they understand that, in the end, a content moderator can take something down.
That's right.
But what we want is that it's applied consistently. You
Exactly.
can't take President Trump down, but not the
That's
Ayatollah.
right.
I mean, like
Exactly,
it's,
exactly.
I think that's what really drives people
right.
crazy.
You're so right. And part of this bill says they've got to tell us what the rules are, just so you know, because nobody knows. You get taken down, you don't know why, you can't get in touch
Right.
with anybody.
There's no
It's
appeal
no appeal
process.
process.
It's-
So frustrating. We're going to fix that in Texas.
Yeah. And you're a customer. I mean, this is a consumer protection
That's
issue.
right. That's right.
In the end, because like your data is going to them, they're making money off of you. They sell
Right.
advertisements to you. In a way, you are a customer. Yes, it's a free service, but you are a customer,
You
right?
bet.
I think we need to see it that
You
way.
bet. And many conservatives have bought the idea that since these are private companies, we can have no role in what they do. But of course, they're common carriers, right? Your telephone company can't cut
Yeah.
you off because of your politics. Your cable
Right.
TV can't deny you service because of your religion.
Right.
These folks are common carriers based on what they do, based on their market share, based on their practices. Justice Thomas has said as much. He's roadmapped it for us. So someone the other day told me that's a leftist concept that we can affect these companies. Well, Justice Clarence Thomas, I'm with him on this one. They're common
Yeah.
carriers. We can step in and protect consumers.
It's definitely tricky, but
It is.
I think there's a way to thread the needle.
I do too.
Like I said, we've got some legislation at the federal
Good.
level that, again, protects Section 230, but also clarifies it and talks about how you cannot censor based on political viewpoints. You
Good.
got to make that explicit.
That's right.
There's a lot of other ideas floating around too, but it's unfortunately not as easy as just, we'll just abolish Section 230. It'd
Sure
probably
not.
make things a lot worse before it got better.
I agree.
That's what people don't realize. And as far as the mainstream media, it is what it is. Like I tell our side, like you can complain about it all you want. It is what it is. Their ratings aren't that high. Yeah, they do have some influence, but that's the nature of debate, unfortunately.
And fewer people are getting their news from those sources because of that reason. So the proliferation of different, my goodness, what you're doing here, this is something they can't control. It's wonderful.
Right. Social media is our best weapon. And it's why Democrats tend to want to tamp down on social media a lot more. People, if you just sort of casually glance at Congress, you'd think there's bipartisan outrage at big tech, but it's not true. I mean, there is outrage, but it's for completely different reasons. The Democrats are mad at big tech because they don't censor enough.
Right.
Because legally they can't infringe on the First Amendment, so they want big tech to do it for them.
That's right.
And they want them to censor and and manage misinformation and things like, which is just that's inherently a subjective term to label what is misinformation. It's just information you disagree with
That's right.
or you have a different take on. So that's why you go write an op-ed,
That's right.
because there's a debate that must occur there, and it's messy. It's messy. That's a free society. It's messy. It's not always what you want, but it's the most optimal outcome. It's the best you got.
It is.
And and we toy with that idea at our own peril.
Amen. Amen to that.
Brian, thanks so much for being on.
Man,
This
thanks
is
for
great.
having me. This has been fun. Thanks a lot.
Later, folks. Hope that was informative. All right. Thanks everybody for showing up. That was great. Senator, thank you so much for lending us your expertise and helping us through a lot of those details. That was
You're
great.
so kind to include us. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. This is really fun. Special
Yeah,
for
it was
us.
fun.
Thanks a lot.